Shalom and welcome to another edition of our Daily Bread, where we discuss the weekly Torah portion. This week's Parashat is the fourth Parashat of the book of Bereshit, also called Genesis, and it's called Vayera, which means "and he appeared." My message for 2012-13 is called Overcoming Death. And in this message this year, one of the things that I want to cover is really a basic concept of what's happening this week's Parashat. What is tying all these things together? I mean, one thing we see, we start off with the messengers of YHWH and his messengers, the three men visiting Avraham, and we get the promise of Yitzhak, his son. We get the issue with Hagar and the birth of Ishmael. We get the visiting of Sodom and Amorah, and the sacrificing of Yitzhak by Avraham, all the way down to the Haftorah, which is the story of the Shunammite woman. So one of the things that I see that is key, if you look at all these, a lot of times we start off with basic observations. One thing that you see all the way throughout there is this concept of judgment, or basically life and death situations coming. And you see that all the way in the beginning when we get into the visitation of Sodom and Amorah and the judgment that's going to come upon them, being this life and death situation. You also see this in the opening story with Avraham and Yitzhak, because really this is about he was an old man, and if he died without an heir, then that essentially would be the end of kind of his family name and such. And so him having a son wasn't just about, oh, I already have 5 sons, but how nice would it be to have a 6th? That wouldn't be the same. The fact is it was an all or nothing. He had no sons, and so that means his death would be more significant, because that whole branch then would have stopped growing. And so it's really life and death of his bloodline that we're talking about in the beginning. And then we get all the way into Yitzhak's life and death encounter, the life and death encounter with Avimelech, and why Avraham said, "She's my sister." And then we get down to the story of the Shunammite woman, which again goes to her not having a son, and then she has a son, and then his death. And so this pattern of life and death, and really overcoming death and the danger of permanent death, is kind of at the foundation, I see, of this week's Parashat. So let's just talk real quick about what that means. We start off with the concept of messengers of life and death. And we start off with this visitation, these messengers, that YHWH is going to come, and these visitors come to visit Avraham. And there's very big significance in this concept, because I think we're going to see how the visitors and YHWH himself are all embodied in his Torah. You see, the Torah, when we think about a messenger's come to deliver a message. Even YHWH, when he delivers his own message, is a messenger. And then obviously when he sends servants, they're messengers for him and for his message. And this is foundational in understanding this concept of what is really going on, and how important are these revelations, these messages that Avraham first got. How about that Noach got? It goes all the way back to Parashat Bereshit, where the message, the words, "Let there be light," that YHWH or Elohim spoke to bring all these things into creation. This was a message. This was a message that was given to, at that time, the darkness and the universe, so to speak. And this message was very important and created all these things. And we're going to see that this message here, God's message, his Torah, his instruction, his word, so to speak, is so important, and it is a message of life and death. As we learned from Moshe, he says, "I set before you good and evil, life and death. Choose life." This whole book is about a message that we're getting. The parable of the sower, when when Mashiach says, "Know you not the parable of the sower? How then shall you know all parables?" See, the initial message, the initial parable that unlocks all these other parables is about what? It's about how we receive the Word of God, or the message of God, right? That represents the seed. Or the seed represents the Word of God, I should say. This is a fundamental understanding of how we understand all messages. It comes back to this core concept of receiving this message and the life and death reaction that we have to it, and how important it is. And that's what we're going to talk about in this concept of overcoming death, is how key it is to being related to the messages that we get from God, and how we respond to them, both good and bad messages, and good and bad responses. That's a summary of what the whole Bible is all about. It's about the good and bad messages we get from God, and how people respond to them, good or bad, in the obedience or disobedience. Is just a good and a bad reaction to a message. So this is fundamental of what we're going to talk about. So we start off with who are the messengers, and how are those relevant to us. Well, the first thing, like I already mentioned, was that the Torah is a messenger. It carries with it the message of God. It's how we connect to God and how we know Him and understand Him and His will. And people are also messengers on multiple levels. Number one, there's direct messengers where God sends somebody, like these three messengers to visit with Avraham. And then there's also a parable as a message. It contains within it something else. And many times people can get caught up in the parable and miss the message. They can get caught up in the messenger and miss the message. And that's important for us to understand this. We're going to see that illustrated a couple times in this week's Parashat, that both good and evil are contained in people. We're all messengers. Our lives are parables or messengers to the truth of God's Word, and we're examples of good and evil, even amongst ourselves. One of the interesting things, a friend of mine on Facebook here had brought to my attention an inappropriate picture that somebody had posted who was connected with me on Facebook. I have over 4,000 connections right now on Facebook, and some of the people I know well, and some of the people I don't. They may be Messianic and sent me a friend request, and I may have connected with them. And it kind of brings us to an interesting thing. This very first concept is that there's a lot of lessons within lessons. My friend on Facebook had said, "Hey, you're connected with this other person, and look, they posted this inappropriate picture." And there's a lot to be learned out of all these situations. So I went and looked at the person, looked him up. I hadn't conversated with him really before, and scrolled through. It looked like most all of his wall was stuff about the Torah and Israel, and scrolling down. I'm not seeing any pictures that are inappropriate of women or anything like that. I scrolled down, I didn't find it, so I went back, looked at the original message that my friend had posted, and then they said, "Oh yeah," they posted a second message saying, "Oh yeah, it was within this time frame on the timeline, blah blah blah." So it wasn't in his normal timeline, but if you click on the other things, I finally end up. I looked in his photos where I did find a picture of a gal who was kind of lifting up her shirt and kind of showing her body off and all that. And I thought, okay, well, it looked like typical stupid pictures that teenage girls and stuff do on Facebook, not in a religious sense, but in the sense of just a worldly sense, with low-cut shirts or, making kissy faces at the screen. And I thought, okay, that's probably not an appropriate picture, but depending on where you stand, for people where they're very focused on Torah and have nothing to do with the secular world, that could be very offensive. In the secular world, maybe wouldn't even be considered inappropriate, probably. That's the kind of world that we're living in nowadays. And then I dug a little further through it and finally found the picture of the that she was talking about, and it had a picture of, I didn't know if it was a girl, the way she described it, just in low-cut shorts or whatever, but it was actually a picture of a girl in a G-string, just a picture of her butt, basically, that had writing superimposed over the top of it. And I read through the comments, and it's interesting because this is really about judgment. And I thought that it fit this message a little bit. It's funny how there's always something during the week that seems to kind of fit the Torah portion, or be connected in some way to lessons we can learn. Well, here I'm looking through most of his stuff, and I'm seeing that 99% of what this guy posts, as a matter of fact, other than those 2 inappropriate pictures going back for years, I didn't see anything else. It wasn't like an ongoing every week, something about Torah, some inappropriate picture or anything like that. I did see that. And so we have to ask ourselves, what does this teach us? We can be rash in our decision and say, oh, hey, this person posted an inappropriate picture, I'm going to unfriend him or this and that. And certainly I can see, I was reading the comments, how some people said, why did you post this? Because they're probably religious people who are happy to see all of his religious posts, and then out of the blue, out of nowhere, he posts this picture of this girl's butt in a G-string. And that was probably shocking. And some of them said, hey, I don't know why you post this, I'm unfriending you. And this is important because there's kind of 2 ways we can look at this. Number one is that, yes, and then other people were saying, hey, it's fine, it's just the human body, there's nothing to be ashamed about, or this and that. I did think the picture was inappropriate. As my friend said, what if that was your daughter? And certainly, what if she was married? Then men could be looking on her with lust, which would be, according to Mashiach, they'd be guilty of adultery, which was a death penalty sin. So, that's the crazy thing, is that something so simple could be literally this picture, right? Like a message, that's what these are, they're little messages, could be a message of death to people. That they could be visited by. A person could look and go, and lust after this picture, and that could be a sin to them, which the wages of sin can be death. So broadcasting something like that probably would be inappropriate. Now, on the flip side, do I cast the guy away and say, hey, in response, the guy had said to my friend, you'd never conversated with me all these times. I'm posting all this stuff about Torah, and you never mention anything until I do something wrong, and now you post for the first time on my wall about me and all this and that. And I could see his point too, which sometimes there's no clear right and wrong scenario. It's really, it's what we learn from it. And I think that we all have sinned. It reminds me of the politics. I'm going to be getting into a message shortly after this one about politics and the poor and how it relates to the Torah. And one of the things that, and we even see it in this week's parashah, is this concept of association, this concept of this all or nothing thing. Well, is the guy perfect, or should I cast him away because he's done one wrong thing? Well, by that standard, then none of us could survive. None of us would be able to be in fellowship with Mashiach, because surely, probably, all of us would be cast away for some wickedness we've done at one point in our life or another. We have to look at the whole scope of our whole life. See that timeline, that Facebook timeline? It's kind of a nice little parable, because what we see is the scope of, it starts off where it says born. Most people don't fill it in, and I don't think Facebook needs to know every detail about us from the beginning to the end. But the point is that that's kind of like looking through our timeline. Okay? Could God find some posts, some things that we did that were either inappropriate or even a sin? Oh, I bet. I know for me, probably a lot. we never want to talk about our own sin. But I would say, before I would cast the guy out and unfriend him and say, I want nothing to do with you because you have this picture from 2010 or 11 or whatever, where you posted an inappropriate picture, I would say, wait a minute, I think it was certainly a good idea to say, hey, I don't appreciate those type of posts and I don't want those on my wall, so please don't post that. I think that's a good thing to say, and I think it may be even a good thing to mention and approach and say, look at what this could be causing. This could be causing sin, even if the person thinks himself it's not a sin to him. It could be causing sins in other people, and so what we do is relevant to what happens to other people. Just like in this week's Parashat, and we'll get to it shortly, that we deal with this a couple times. We deal this with Sarah, who gives her handmaid to her husband Avraham to have a wife. Later, it turns out not so. She doesn't like the outcome once Hagar conceives, and doesn't esteem Sarah as well. And then Sarah, and it isn't clear. There's different interpretations of what it could mean when she says, "My sin be upon you," to her husband. Is she saying, one person could take it that she's saying, I'm sorry I've done this, I shouldn't have done this, my sin's now impacting you, because I'm realizing now that this wasn't a good choice. Or she could, other commentators might say that she's blaming Avraham and saying that this isn't her sin, this is his sin, maybe he shouldn't have done it, or maybe he contributed to this relationship in a way that now she feels like the third wheel or cast out. There's a lot of different ways these things could be taken. But the fact is what we see is that her decision spilled out to affecting other people. Just in the same way when Avraham made a choice to say, please say you're my sister, to Avimelech. Now Avimelech says when he's getting visited by God, who's saying that, if you don't let this woman go, I'm going to kill you. And he's saying, hey, in the innocency of my own heart did I do this, because she did say she was his sister. And he said, that is my sister. So how would I have known? Why am I being judged when I did what was right? And he's now getting judgment coming to him for something that somebody else had done. And in the same way, we see that this a third time with the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, when Avraham, there's multiple ways this applies. One is when Avraham intercedes for Sodom and Gomorrah to save the cities if there's enough righteous people in them, right? They don't even know that Avraham's choice and his relationship with Elohim may save the entire city from destruction, right? And the other way this impacts is this also impacts that Lot, being righteous, is the only thing that's withholding judgment from the city. If Lot wasn't there and needed to come out, judgment would have come sooner. And then even when the angels visited Sodom, their reaction could have been much different. They could have repented, they could have done a lot of things, and that choice could have changed the whole outcome. So we see that these situations that we do have furthering effects, just like this guy posting this picture may have further negative effects. And it was funny, he said, well, now you see this as a negative, but look, I see this as a positive. You said that your daughter or something was in need of prayer, and had it not be for me posting this, that wouldn't have come to my attention. And his reply was, let's focus on the positive. Now I can be in prayer for your daughter. And see, it's funny because there are points about his statement that are correct, and yet that doesn't exclude the fact that maybe he shouldn't have posted that, and he might be bringing other sins to other people, other men who are looking upon this woman naked body with lust. And so there's a lot of sorting out to be done here. It isn't just a simple I'm right, you're wrong, or or you're wrong and I'm right type of situation. That's where wisdom comes in, is as we look at these things and we extract from them. Many times people treat the Torah the same way. They want to just pick the simple meaning and go, well, let's just go with that. Okay, it says this, that, and the other. And they don't understand that there's further lessons to be learned. That there's lessons that start in the beginning of the Torah that go all the way through the Torah. That there's points from the beginning of this parashat that tie to other points. They're not all individual. This isn't a story about Avraham being visited, and that has nothing to do with the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and that has nothing to do with the Shunammite woman. These all are connected. And as we start to examine these things like a just judge should, we start to try and extrapolate what parts of this are learning points, and what can I learn from this, and what is good and what is bad about the decisions being made on both parties. What did the men of Sodom do that was a sin? What can I learn from their sin? What can I learn from what Lot did? And what can I learn from both the righteous and the wicked? You see, inherently we are people who are filled, our timeline is filled with good and bad deeds and good and bad choices. And then we have the Word of God, which is full of stories of wicked men and righteous men, and we can learn from those. And so this is about the messengers, that all of us are messengers of life and death. Everybody, whether you think they're an idiot or not, has something that you can learn from them, whether it's what not to do or it's what to do. And a lot of people make the mistake in doing an all or nothing situation. Oh, I don't want to talk to you because you're not perfect. Well, then they wouldn't be able to even have an inner dialogue with themselves, because they themselves are full of sin and wickedness. It goes to what I was saying earlier about the political propaganda and nonsense that everybody gets caught up into. Oh, I'm for Romney, oh, I'm for Obama, or whatever, and oh, my candidate's the best and yours is the devil. Just judgment isn't there. It's not balanced, because I don't hear people saying what's wrong with their candidate and what's wrong with the opposition, and what's right with the opposition and what's right with their candidate. That would be an indicator of just judgment, meaning that we're weighing out everything, that we're not being a respecter of persons to either the person we like or the person we dislike. That doesn't show me that just judgment is happening. It shows me that slander is happening on both sides. The same thing happens here in this scenario, is that we have to approach these things carefully, because when we're dealing with people, we're dealing with good and bad. And we have to dissect and learn how to still love somebody and say, hey, well, 99% of what you're posting up here is positive and all this, but it's okay for me. It doesn't mean I should be silent if you post something totally wrong. Actually, just judgment would say that I would probably say, hey, I don't like this that you're posting, but on the other hand, I don't throw you away and condemn you as a person because of one poor deed that you did or one poor decision, because look at all these other 99 that I see, 99% I see, yeah, I do agree with that. And just having real conversations, and before we are ready to do a life and death push of the button of you're in or you're out, let's extract out the good, just like Lot was extracted from Sodom and Gomorrah. He didn't, just like Avraham pleaded. He says, surely, right, the God of all living is not going to kill, basically, the righteous with the wicked, right? You're going to pick out those that are righteous and not give them the same punishment you would those that are wicked, right? And this is the same way we have to learn to do with our judgment in all matters. We have to learn how to pull out, and not just try and say, well, it's got to be either I got to be a Republican or a Democrat. It's got to be either good or it's got to be evil over here. I got to throw the guy totally away, or I got to totally accept him. That's not how it works. Judgment is to rightly divide and to say, well, just as it does to the churches in Revelations, God says, well, this, I like that you did this, but this I have against you. I mean, that's how we are. Most people are a combination of good and bad, of good and evil. And the point is how can we increase the good and diminish or remove the evil? That's all of our personal goals, I think, for ourselves, and should be our goals towards other people and our impact on other people. But we have to have just judgment in order to do that. We can't skip judgment, which is the sorting of what's good and what's evil. and just take the whole package and either accept it even with evil mixed in, or accept it only if it's perfect, and or only if it's all wicked. I mean, this isn't really how we deal with people. So we get to the second part, which is our reaction. And this is what we can learn from this. We start right off with the opening of this parashah was we see an illustration of the reaction when Avraham sees these messengers that are coming to him, these guests. And it's often said in traditional Jewish thought that one of the great traits of Avraham was his hospitality. They say, oh, he had doors on all sides of his tent, because that's how hospitable he was. He wants to greet anybody with open arms, no matter which direction they come. I don't know that there's anything to that, or that it's true. Sounds interesting. But what we do see is that his reaction to these messengers right away was to run out and greet them and ask them to come in to him and provide food for him and to welcome them. And that goes to the same thing with how we treat other people. How do we treat the message of God? How do we treat the Torah? Do we run out to it? At this point, Avraham doesn't know if this judgment, right? We compare Avraham, where the judges came to him ultimately, the messengers, to visit him. And when you come into somebody's house, you take a judgment, just like my friend was looking at what this guy posted on his timeline and making a judgment into his house. And when we go into the houses, just like me, there may be some things I agree with and some things I disagree with. I can go into the homes of most Messianics and see things, wow, I like that. That makes sense. Look, he's got a Torah, he's got this and that. And then there might be things that I might disagree with. There might be TV shows that they watch or movies that they own that might be inappropriate. But we have to be careful about how we deal with people, because sometimes we can take the one thing we have wrong with them and make it all of who they are. And not realize that we are flawed. I think the foolish thought is that we're all perfect, or that we're so great that someone couldn't come into our house and find something that was inappropriate. Because for most people we could. For God to look through our timeline of all the choices we've ever made, He can certainly find things that in our house that He would find as inappropriate or not perfect. And thank goodness that He doesn't throw us away because of one thing, and that He works with us, and that He cares about us as a person enough to say, hey, this person is sick, this person is not healthy. Can they run a marathon? No, not in their current condition, but could I help them back to health to where they could be fully healed and fully healthy? Absolutely. We don't know where we're going to end out. And instead of looking upon the sick and having disdain and saying, oh, this person is diseased, I want nothing to do with them. Instead, it's, how can I help that person be made whole? It's the servant's heart that comes to it. And it's the same way. When we see sin in our brothers, instead of saying, oh, look at this person, he's horrible, instead a better heart to have is, oh, well, maybe I can share with him. Maybe I can and go to him and say, hey, this and that. And that may help him grow. Now he still may have that flaw. Look, we're talking about one blip, one moment in I love the analogy, the parable of that timeline. There's one thing that, hey, it's everything. One of these things doesn't belong clearly. You can see everything, and then it's like, wow, it's almost like from somebody else. It's, but our lives are full of those things, right? I mean, the lives of Israel is full of those things. The lives of the high priest. Look at Aharon the high priest. He's so holy. He's chosen by God. He's doing these great things. He's holier and held to such a high standard of who God chose out of all the nation of Israel. And then we get to a point in his timeline where he makes a golden calf. That's kind of a picture of a girl's butt and a G-string. You look at it and you say, the high priest did that? Why in the world would the high priest do that? That doesn't fit. That shouldn't be on his timeline. But he did it. Moshe, awesome guy, humblest man in all the earth. God speaks to him, does wonderful, goes all the way through. One point he strikes the rock twice. He wasn't supposed to do that. That shouldn't be on his timeline. Doesn't get to go into the kingdom because of that. Now, does that make Moshe not a great man? Biblically, no. He was an awesome, righteous messenger of Elohim who did so many good things and went through so many difficult things. You know, we are more than just our moments. We have an entire timeline of things. We have an entire life that's important, and we have moments of death in our timeline. Moments where we hope that we weren't visited and that wasn't the entirety of who we are. Because just like it says in Ezekiel, the person who was righteous who then turns to wickedness, his righteousness will be forgotten. But that's a person who is wicked and turns to righteousness, his wickedness will be forgotten. See, what really matters is this time of visitation, where you are when you're visited by God, where you are as a person when you end your life. Who were you at the end? Who's the who was the pinnacle of that life? Who did you become? Because you could have had a long history of sin, or you could have had a very short history of sin. You could have been righteous most of the way, had a blip where you were wicked a couple times, and then you went back to righteousness. Good, please end in righteousness. This is important. I think we can see in the scriptures it's important. But we have to be very careful how we bring judgment on the others. Now, certainly Avraham could have sat up there and said, wow, the men of Sodom are wicked. They're so wicked, why don't you just wipe them all out? I mean, I want to watch. You know? They deserve it. Right? Like Jonah did, Jonah with Nineveh. The fact is Mashiach could have came back and said, wow, God, look at all these guys. They're so wicked. Just lightning bolt them all right now. They don't deserve it. I do. You know? I'm the only one that's any good hardly around here. He could have said that. But he didn't. That wasn't the spirit and the heart where he came. And that takes us to this reaction. Welcoming the messengers. What did Avraham do? He showed hospitality and humility. Right? This is an important thing. Look at what Lot did. Lot came out and he bowed down before the messengers. Right? He doesn't know if those messengers are visiting him to come punish him, or they're coming to bring a blessing, just like Avraham didn't know. But you start off in humility and hospitality, with open ears, and humility where you're humbled. And this is how Moshe was. He came before YHWH humble. I'm not worthy even. Why would you pick me to go tell someone, even Paro, who was doing wickedness? Who am I to go tell him? I'm nothing. Right? He humbled himself. And this is really something that we can learn in how we approach other people. And how we approach. See, it's easy to say, hey, wait a minute. And I'm not saying that my friend approached this person that way. I think she did a pretty good job. But a lot of people might have approached him and said, hey, wait a minute. You posted a picture that's inappropriate. You're wicked. I would never do that. I'm righteous. Unfriend. Get out of my face. And the whole summation of that man would be on one deed that he did. That's too hasty a judgment. I hope people aren't so quick to make life and death judgments over people. I hope people aren't ready to summarize an entire person based on one action they did. I hope not. Because I wouldn't want to be judged by one action that I've done, because you can go through my life and pick out plenty of actions that I'm ashamed of, plenty of actions that aren't good choices, actions that I regret, actions that I repent from. And I probably still have sin that I haven't repented from, that I should repent from, that a person could point out. I think we all do. And I think we start by humbling ourselves, even in front of other wicked people. Because the first thing that I do is I go and I sit here and I see, okay, here's a guy who I think maybe that wasn't a good choice for him to do. And instead of going, wow, look at him, so unrighteous. Who does he think he is, claiming to be this righteous guy, right? This is how people treat people. Character assassination. It's what's happening all the time right now in politics. And religious people and Messianics are getting caught up into it. That's why I'm doing my other message. And they really need to be humbled and realize their sin and what they're doing. Just like the people who came against Job, and thought they were all righteous and pointing out what he was doing wrong. In the end, it was them who was being unrighteous in their high and mighty attitudes towards this person. And they needed to sacrifice, Job needed to sacrifice to protect them from what they'd done wronging God and their inappropriateness, while they thought they were pointing the finger at him. You see, we got to be very careful when we point out sin in somebody else, because at that point, as the same measure we measure is measured back to us, we're going to fall short by our own measurement. Have I ever clicked, my wife, she pointed out I'd made a comment on somebody. I wasn't always a religious person. I wasn't raised in religion. As a matter of fact, I ran around and got into all kinds of trouble growing up. And I was a skateboarder and very much a rebellious person in my younger years, and as that crowd is. And I had saw a picture a while back of a girl sitting, scantily dressed girl sitting on a skateboard, and I made an off comment about it, and my wife said, "Really?" And she called me on it and said, I don't, think that was an appropriate comment. Well, to the person who had a skateboard business, it was a skater website, it made sense because I knew who I was talking to. I knew that crowd. And that, in my thought, what I was saying to them was in something that would be typical in that crowd. But it was, when you compare that to a religious crowd, it wouldn't have been acceptable. And I was corrected. And I deleted the statement, and I felt, okay, yeah, you're right, I shouldn't have said that. That was the old teenage me making a response to that environment that I used to be a part of. And it really got me thinking about that most people, we're all different people. We've grown up. We've been parts of different things. Who I am today certainly isn't who I was growing up. The things I value today I didn't value before, and things that I would have thought were okay before I certainly wouldn't think are okay now. And we're all growing and learning. And I thank God that He has some mercy on us. And that mercy is really the time we have to grow and learn and correct ourselves. And we need to be merciful with other people, even in our judgment, and not be quick to demonize people and count the whole as a little piece. Because that's not the right heart to approach it. I think that the people who are humble are the people who, compassion comes from suffering. When you've suffered, you have compassion on other people who suffer. When you were sinful and repented from those sins, you have compassion on the sinful. And I think it's easy to get the other way and start getting into that proud bracket because you forgot. It's like the old saying, if you forget where you came from, you're on your way back. And I absolutely agree. I think we don't have to be haughty, and we don't have to be holier than thou to people because we've learned something. Turn around, oh, the Christians! I can't believe they're believing that Christmas. Don't they know that's pagan? And yet, this is being said by people who themselves celebrated Christmas, 5 years ago, and turned from it. It's all relative to where you are in that timeline, because maybe now you don't do that, but before you did. And if you've ever been wrong, and you've ever thought one way that now you think differently, then at that time you were justifying yourself and you thought you were right. Even if you've ever sinned, at the time you made that choice because in your mind it was the acceptable choice of the moment. Whether you think it's right or wrong didn't matter. It was right enough that you made the choice and you sinned. And to come back now, when you repent, you can say, oh, I realize now I shouldn't have made that choice. Hopefully you won't make that choice again. But to be haughty on somebody else who's currently in a sin, when you all through your life are in moments of sin and righteousness, doesn't make any sense. And if you want to sum up their whole life on that one sin, then you better be ready to be judged for the one sin you've ever created and have your whole life be diminished and minimized based on and maximize just that one sin and say, that's all this person ever was, is that sin. Well, my sins before are not the sin, they're not the person who I am now. And even daily when I'm challenged and I'm tested, as Avraham was tested here, you hope you pass those tests, but I know I fail at times. And we need to cut other people that same type of slack. So we look at the reactions. Notice that what a difference there is when, in this parasha, when there's blessings, right? Our reactions to messengers of blessings, and our reaction, look at the men of Sodom, to, oh, who made you judge over us? Because the message now isn't good for us, and so we reject it. I see that all the time in the scriptures. If you try and share with somebody, here's something that I disagree with you, then many times they come back against you because the message was not good. But if you were sharing something positive, just like a long time ago when I dealt with that Shaul dog guy, and I simply asked him, because he'd said on his podcast, if it isn't in the scriptures, don't believe it. And so I asked him, I said, I don't think that your theory on resurrection is biblical. Show me the scriptures where it says that Messiah wasn't a human sacrifice, because certainly he was a sacrifice and he was a human. And he even said that no one takes his life. He offered it. And then we have Yitzhak, as in this week's parasha, who's Avraham is commanding, or YHWH is commanding Avraham to offer his son as a burnt sacrifice. That is a human sacrifice. God is commanding it. And people say, oh, well, human sacrifice is a sin. I think, well, you can't prove that biblically. I think you can show where God hated that people were sacrificing their children to Molech, which was an idol. But if you don't balance the other side of that, saying, yeah, but he asked Avraham to sacrifice Yitzhak, he's not going to ask you to sin. It doesn't work that way. And he's certainly not going to give you the biggest blessing of all time because you were willing to do it if it really was a sin. So if people say, oh, he's just testing him, he knew he wasn't going to do it, or whatever, well, then that goes back to, well, then Avraham should have been cursed for being willing to do that if it was a test that way. He wasn't cursed for being willing to do a human sacrifice. He was blessed. As a matter of fact, the whole blessing that all the people get, all the way around, and all the people want to take a hold of this covenant and the new covenant, all that comes down to the original promise to the seed of Abraham, which was based on a test of was he willing to sacrifice a human sacrifice of his own son. And he was, and therefore the covenant was made with him. So you can't biblically prove that human sacrifice is wicked. People just associate that in their mind, that because pagans do that, it's wicked. Well, pagans offer sacrifices to an idol, which is wicked, because you're offering it to a false god. But God receives sacrifices, animal sacrifices to himself, and that isn't wicked. So animal sacrifice isn't wicked, but animal sacrifice to a pagan god is wicked. And it's the same with human sacrifice. So, and people don't like the way that sounds, well, then argue with the Bible, because that's just what we have. It's not what I think, it's just what was done. So the fact is that goes to what I'm talking about. When we don't like the outcome of the message, when we don't want to hear it, then all of a sudden we can't hear it, or we won't hear it, or we become against it. People who come against it, just like Shaul Dog came against me because I asked him this question. Next thing you know, he's saying, oh, this guy looks like a Muslim. Who is this guy? He's got a secret weave in that head covering that says the name of Allah, even though it's a single stitch crochet knit head covering, which I actually, in my video response to him, had the lady who made it. I called her. I wanted to know, what kind of stitch pattern is this? Is it, again, to be a just judge, if someone accused me, do I know? Did I mistakenly buy something that was wicked? I looked into it. I got verification. It's the most common stitch in all crocheting is a single knot stitch. That's all this is. So if that's the case, then every grandma who made an ugly sweater for their kids or a pair of mittens is secretly putting the name of Allah on it. I mean, it was slander. It was an attack against me. because I called into question something that he said. And I didn't even come against it. I just said, show me in the scriptures where it says that. It doesn't say that. And you're the one saying it should be in the scriptures or don't believe it. Now, if I'd have come in and said, hey, I love your podcast, it's the best thing I've ever heard, would he have still said, well, you look like a Muslim, and I think that's secret Allah knit in your head covering? You see, that's where I call BS. We're not having just judgment here. If he was having just judgment, he should have brought those things to my attention if he thought that there was wickedness with me. He didn't. He wouldn't have if I would have agreed with him. You see, that's the problem. We can't slander someone because we don't like them, and not criticize them because we do like them. That's not just judgment. We should criticize, just like politics, you should criticize the Democrats and the Republicans if you have just judgment. And you should also find things that you like in both parties. That shows me that there's someone home, someone's acting intelligently, they're having just judgment, not taking sides. Taking sides is the hallmark of unjust judgment. It's the hallmark of coveting, which is taking a bribe and altering your judgment for your own gain, being a respecter of persons. All those things are wickedness, you see. And I'm going to get to that in my message that I'm going to do later about politics and the Torah. But the point is that we look at the reactions. Because the men of Sodom felt that the judgment was going to come against them, they wanted to kill and molest his guests. And notice the opposite in Avraham, who was hospitable, whether they were going to come and bring a good message or not. He didn't act differently when God was blessing him with a child than he did when God asked him to go sacrifice his son, his only son, this promised child, this blessing he finally gets after all this time. It's, the big deal, the most valuable thing he possesses is Yitzhak. And God says, go and offer him up as a sacrifice. And he didn't change his tune, which he could have done, and made it different. He obeyed in the same way he responded when he was given a blessing, is the same way he responded and approached it when he was given this horrible thing of saying he was going to have to go offer his only son Isaac up for a sacrifice. Those are the things we can learn, is that our reactions show our spirit and our correct judgment. Some people won't even hear it. If it doesn't line up with what they want to believe, they won't even hear it. It becomes this all or nothing. Well, this person did one bad thing, so he is bad. He is wicked. Let's exploit and magnify his sin and diminish his righteousness, instead of looking at the whole and looking at where he is currently, and also having that heart of a humble servant who comes to him and says, oh, please, here's these things that I think would be better for you. And then the person can react any way they want. They can be humbled by it, or they can go against it and say this person's an idiot. Next we see association. In this week's parashah we see that not only were they going to come against the messengers who came to Sodom to destroy it, but then when he comes out and says, wait a minute, when Lot comes out and says, wait a minute, please, he wanted to protect his guests. He says, here, take my daughters, right? And then they didn't want his daughters, and they said, who's making you judge? Now, because he's been hospitable to these people who are saying right things and bringing right judgment against the city of Sodom, who is doing wickedness, now just because he's associated with them, they want to mob him now. So they're not having just judgment even with him, because he was fine, just like I said. He was fine a minute ago. But when guests come into his house that are saying this city is doing wickedness, all of a sudden they want to kill Lot. And they want to bring it against him, even though he wasn't necessarily bringing judgment against them. This is like the same thing. I see it all the time in politics. Someone posted on the wall. They said, my initial response to someone posted something about somebody who they normally liked, and someone posted something negative about him and said, oh, look, they took money from this person, and this person also supports this other thing. It was a political post. And I responded. I didn't know the person that well, and I thought, she posted it, so maybe if I say something, right, she might get angry at me, as I usually expect, because I don't take her side. And I said, it's a little bit of rubbish, in my opinion, because there is no connection. Just because this person was a speaker and got paid by this person, and that person always also hired somebody else, doesn't connect that person who got paid from this person to everybody they've ever done business with. That is not very logical. That means if you went and bought a soda, that because the CEO of that company who makes that soda also likes homosexuals, that you must be for homosexuals. Because he also bought a coffee at Starbucks, and Starbucks likes homosexuals, so therefore you're connected to homosexuality and the gay agenda. And it's like, no, that doesn't have anything to do with the other. That would be a false association. And that wouldn't be just judgment. Because the fact is that guy who paid for her to go speak about business or whatever might also be into prostitutes. And his same dollars might be spent on a prostitute. Doesn't mean that when he pays you for a good or service that you did, that it has anything to do with prostitution. That's unjust judgment. Why? Because they wanted to slander that person. That person, they wanted to make an association to negative things. And I said, look at the picture they used for her. They didn't use a picture and say, hey, factually she's connected to this other association, or that this guy also, it was the Black Panthers. This guy paid for her and also supported the Black Panthers. I said, it doesn't show that this girl over here supports the Black Panthers. No evidence has been shown to that. If it was, then if you don't like that association, you could make your choice. But I said, when I first looked at this, I used critical thinking, and I saw they have a picture of this girl, and it's got this, gotcha moments where she looks angry, and it's a bad picture of her to show, oh, look, she's really negative. We're going to make her look bad. And then it started all these slanderous connections that weren't directly associated. And even though I may not agree with the gal who was being slandered, as far as her political things or whatever, this and that, the fact was I could instantly tell it was a hit job, it was a slander job on her, and that's what I brought out. And I showed, look, let's use critical thinking. Why did they choose this picture? Because they're trying to demonize her. If what she was, I respect more if someone was just making a direct connection. Look, here, she likes the Black Panthers, she donated this amount of money, therefore if you don't like that, then maybe you should bring it up to her. But to do this roundabout association that she once got paid from this guy who also is associated with this guy, and then doing all that, it's a slander. That's a sin. The Torah doesn't allow for that. That's unjust judgment. That's being slander is the opposite of being a respecter of persons, or it's the same in concept. It's saying if I don't like a person, I'm going to make them out to be this horrible thing, even when it's not justly done. That is bearing a false witness, that is slander, and that is a sin. And you're no more justified doing it than you are trying to help the poor, thinking that you're awesome. That's a sin. And you're busy trying to point out someone else's sin while you're in the act of sin. Okay? That's not okay. I don't want to get deep into that because I'm going to save that for another post. But the point is, we talk about association. Lot was among the wicked. And in the same way, Avraham says, basically, you're not going to associate and punish the righteous with the wicked, are you, just because they're there? So what happens is Lot's brought out, it's separated. This is the pattern. I'm going to take what's good out from there, I'm going to distinguish between what's good and what's bad, so I don't mix the two together. That's the opposite of character assassination. That's saying, okay, this part's wicked, but this part's okay. So when I'm judging the whole, I've got to be able to discern that. And even if there was 10 righteous among the 90% wicked, God would have been patient with them. Doesn't mean He gives them a pass for their wickedness, but the judgment wouldn't have come upon them. So thank God that He has that kind of patience with us, because we're all at different levels of wickedness. If you're looking at our whole life, or looking at us just right now even, we have different things that are perfect or good and not perfect and wicked. So we look at this whole concept and we learn about overcoming death, that we're bringing death to ourselves. This isn't about others. This is about our choices. Avraham had the chance to plead with God over the outcome of an entire city. But when he was asked himself to go and sacrifice Yitzhak, this was judgment coming upon him. And that was really more important than the judgment upon the city. This was his own life he's fighting for. If he would have disobeyed God, that would have been, I think, not only the death of Avraham, but in trying to save Yitzhak alive, Yitzhak would have probably been put to death anyway. And he wouldn't have continued his bloodline forward because he wasn't honoring God and didn't deserve that promise at that point. So we look at this and we see that we're so quick to make judgment. Avraham could have made a quick judgment on Sodom. Look at the cost. Look at, I see a lot of people also quick to make judgment on Lot, who offered up his 2 daughters. Right? And I've heard atheists say that, use those examples. Look, he was going to throw his daughters to an angry mob. Does that sound like that's the right thing to do? Let your daughters be raped? And I've heard even Messianics and religious people thinking, kind of talking about that like that. But we look at this and we say, that, I don't think he was throwing his daughters out there like, here, rape my daughters. Doesn't bother me none. But we look at the fact that he was willing to give up, just like Avraham, his own flesh and blood in order to preserve the messengers of God, the message of God, and his messengers, which is a model of the Torah. What would you give up for the Torah? Would you give up your own family, like Lot offering up his 2 daughters to that angry mob, for people he perceived to be the messengers of God? I mean, when the test really comes, do you treat the Word of God and the Torah like, well, that's good as long as it doesn't come to life and death? Well, the Torah is cool, I'm all religious, until I'd have to actually suffer for it? Or until I disagree with parts of it? Until I say, wow, it looks like here, that there was human sacrifice. That doesn't seem, human sacrifice seems bad to me. Well, should I go with my thoughts on that or God's, even if I don't understand it? Should I humble myself in my theories and just figure maybe I've got it wrong, maybe I'm not seeing it right? Or should I condemn the Word of God? See, there's many difficult things in the Scriptures, but we don't condemn the Word of God over it, because it's us that's flawed in our judgment, not God's judgment. We look at Yitzhak. Wow. That's a cost that Avraham was willing to pay in order to obey God. Should we be critical? Should we be critical of God, or should we assume that what God was asking was correct and that our understanding is incorrect? Should we look at ourselves and say, wow, do I think I would pay that much just for the privilege of following God and obeying His Torah? Look at Lot's daughters sleeping with their father. It's the exact same thing. Everyone's like, wow, that's insane, that's incest, that's wickedness. They're not getting it. There's a difference. If Lot slept with his daughters, that's a sin. You're not supposed to sleep with your sleep with your near kin like that. But them sleeping with their father, as the story illustrates, when they got him drunk so he wouldn't be aware, I believe so that he wouldn't be sinning. I think they were trying to protect their father, and in the end what they were trying to do is they were trying to honor their father in the fact that this is the resonating story of this, that is, if he died, there would be no, number one, his bloodline would die. As far as they were concerned, maybe it was the end of the whole world. They might have thought that they were the last people on earth. And number two, his line wouldn't be preserved. And that was more important. I don't think they wanted to sleep. I don't think any daughter wants to sleep with their father. But I don't think any father wants to sacrifice his own son. I don't think any father wants to throw his own 2 daughters out to an angry mob to be raped. This is where judgment comes in. These are difficult things. But if we casually, with no deep thought, just come to quick, rash judgments, just like people could have said about Saddam, oh, just wipe out the city. You're talking about people's lives. You're talking about about judgment, and this is no light matter. And we have to be careful, even in thinking we're just in our judgment. We have to be very careful and slow and cautious in how we deal with things. Look at, Lot's wife turning back and looking back, turned into a pillar of salt. And you could see some people might say, well, she deserves it. She was told not to. Other people could blame God and say, God shouldn't have killed her just for looking back. Both are rash judgments on one side or the other that don't require much depth of thought. And true judgment requires depth of thought and humility. We see this illustrated with Avimelech, who it says that, this is section I call beyond integrity. He said, in the integrity of my own heart, I did these things. In other words, she said she was his sister. So this wouldn't be a sin if she really was his sister. There would be no sin there. So I didn't sin by choice. So why should I be facing judgment if I didn't sin? And God said he knew that he did that. And God also restrained him. Because God doesn't want to destroy the righteous man. On the other hand, he could have done it in the wickedness of his own heart, then he would be destroyed. So at this point, if he doesn't release the person's wife, Abraham's wife, he would be killed. So he made the correct choice, even though it didn't look like it. And if he didn't make the next correct choice, he would be dead. So he better prove it and continue making the right choice now that he knows. Which is, when it talks about overcoming death, to me that's just like a Christian. It's one thing if you didn't know that the law was done away with. Many people are ignorant. And in the innocency of their own heart and the lies that they've been told, they may have rejected the law, thinking that's what Galatians did mean. That's what Paul was talking about. But you haven't studied it. You haven't studied the whole Bible, and you don't know, and you're making a mistake, and you're living in error. And that error could kill you if you continue in it. And now you're being warned that there's something more there, that you need to study it deeper, that you haven't got it right. You've been misled, and maybe you did it based on your own theory, but once you've been told that there may be a problem and that you may be facing judgment by not keeping the Torah, and you may be mistaken by rejecting it and thinking it was done away with. Once you've been told that, you have a choice to make. You can either continue and say, oh, I'm sure I'm right, or you can go back and triple check it, because your life is on the line. You're being visited, right? And you better make sure and triple check and make sure you're right, and that you got it right, because this is your life you're dealing with. It's just like with Lot, when he went and told his son-in-laws and said, get out of the get out of the city, God's going to destroy it. And they thought he was joking. Well, if somebody's joking about, hey, I'm not going to pay you for the work you did yesterday, just kidding. Oh, that's a joke. There's lots of jokes. Hey, did you hear the one about the rabbi and the 2 Messianics that go into a bar? That's a joke. If someone says, flee because I think this is a life and death situation, you probably need to look into it. That's not something you go, I just thought he was joking. I'd double check and make sure he wasn't joking. Oh, are you joking? Or are you serious? Do I need to look into this? Well, it's the same thing. Overcoming death is about how we receive the messengers of God. And you better make sure. You better do more than make a judgment, just like a judgment over this guy who posts one bad picture. I'm not going to just unfriend him because of one bad picture. I need to go in and I need to look and I need to evaluate and talk to him and see what's going on and do all that. That's my duty before I cast a judgment. The person who started going all gangbusters slandering me, maybe you should talk to me first. Maybe you should talk about the issues. Maybe you should ask me. See, to me, accusing someone of saying, oh, they're a Muslim, because people have a negative connotation of Muslims, that's a character assassination. Wouldn't it be easy to say, are you a Muslim? Wouldn't that be the first place? And if the person says, no, I'm not a Muslim, then they're either lying, so they're still lying, they're a liar at that point, or they're telling the truth. You know, that one's no-brainer. The reason why you can easily know it's a slanderous attack against me is Muslims don't drink alcohol. I'll drink a beer right in front of you. If I would forsake, in that case, if he really cared, if it wasn't a slanderous attack to try and discredit me because I was asking him to prove his point with the Torah, if he really was concerned, if his judgment was just and he was really concerned that I was a Muslim, then he could simply test me and say, you know, things Muslims wouldn't say, that Allah is not God. Right? They wouldn't forsake their own God. I mean, if you know anything about Muslims, you could probably kill them before they'd do that. So that'd be easy. If he was being an honest and just person, he would say, okay, renounce Allah and say he's nothing. They could have done that, and I would have done that, therefore, problem over, and he wouldn't have to keep slandering me. But the fact is that he went on a series and a series of things and accusations and all of this with no foundation. He didn't know me before I asked him to prove what he was saying with the scriptures, and he didn't know anything about me. You can go through hundreds of my messages. They're not about the Quran. It was just a slanderous attack. And the fact is that that's the kind of things that people do to the messenger when they don't like the message. They try and hurt him, hurt the messenger. That's what they did to Mashiach. They didn't like what he was saying, so they wanted to kill him. They couldn't argue with what he was saying when he was correcting them on the interpretation of the Torah. So instead they just said, we need to get rid of him then. We need to hurt him, try and discredit his character. That's what they followed him around doing. That's exactly what's happening in politics nowadays. They don't like the person. Why not just say, look, your theory is a top-down, lower taxes and regulation and help the rich so that somehow comes down to the poor, and the other guy's saying, no, I believe in taxing the rich and distributing that back to... Why have to demonize the character? Why not just say, look, we have two different theories of how this would be good for the country. You can believe yours, and I can believe mine, and we don't have to attack each other and try and slander each other over it or try and lie about it. Just say, these are two theories. Anybody who's studied economics knows that that's exactly what they are. Economics are theories. There's no exact way to say, if I do this, it'll do this to the economy. They lower interest rates, they do different things, hoping that it'll impact different things. It's not an exact science because it's way too complex. Anybody who knows anything about economics knows that you have two different, a bottom-up and a top-down theory are just two different theories. It's nothing to say somebody is the Antichrist or they're the devil or they're Hitler over, like all people do over all these different political leaders, both Republican and Democrat. They're constantly doing all this stuff. That makes people sound foolish. It's a bad judgment, and it means that they're not actually talking about the issues intelligently. They're just ignorantly saying, well, you're a poopy face. I don't see that as intelligence. So to me, that's just ignorant, and ignorance and slander, are no way to learn and no way to be a human being. We have to think about this and how we deal with messengers and messages that we like and we don't like. And we need to learn to start having just judgment. You see, it's all about giving and taking. Yishmael and Yitzhak, same thing. God gives Yitzhak, but Sarah tried to give Yishmael. Both are an increase of a child, but one is acceptable and one isn't. Sometimes the line is it comes down to reasoning why you're doing what you're doing, not the actual actions. Some wicked actions are wicked, and some righteous actions, just like he said with the Pharisees, who were outwardly righteous, but they're actually inwardly wicked. They only appear righteous, but they're not actually righteous. You can be fooled. And some outward righteous actions are actually because of inward righteousness. So the same thing, adding a child to Avraham was done with both Yitzhak and Ishmael. But one of them was acceptable by God, and one of them was them trying to do it their own way. And it wasn't a good thing. The same thing when Avraham argues. Well, you want to argue with God, you could be burned up on the spot. But Avraham was arguing, and what he was saying was correct. And he was arguing for the righteous. And God wasn't going to look past that. And so it wasn't about whether Avraham argued and whether arguing with God is right or wrong. There's more to it than just that surface, simple understanding. Same thing with Saddam and Lot's daughters. Lot offering his daughters to an angry mob could seem like a wrong thing, or it could be a huge cost and a sacrifice he was willing to do in order to protect God's messengers, which would be an acceptable thing. Don't be so quick to judge. Avimelech's judgment on the surface seemed right, but what we learned about it was that it actually wasn't. He needed to get Sarah out of his house, even though it appeared right. The blessings and the chosen. Look, Ishmael's blessed. He's going to be a large nation because that blessing was given to Abraham's seed, and Ishmael is Abraham's seed. But yet that didn't mean that he was the chosen one. Yitzhak was the chosen one. Both are blessed, but one was chosen. There's a slight difference, and you have to learn the difference. The killing of Yitzhak, or the fact that he was going to kill Yitzhak. He commanded him to kill him. Technically, he didn't kill him and offer him. But he was going to, and that satisfied YHWH. See, judgment isn't always the simple understanding we get, the gut reaction we get. A lot of times it goes deeper. And we need to do that when we're dealing with the Torah. We need to do that when we're dealing with other people. When we're judging other people. When we're judging ourselves. We need to go deeper. This is really what we learn. And it ends up when we learn about the Shunammite woman. What did she do? She provided a place for a servant of Elohim. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't know she was going to get anything, or even that making a place for that messenger of God could have brought a curse upon her. Because what if he came and saw some uncleanness or wickedness in her household and brought judgment upon her? But what did she do? She made place for the messenger and therefore the message of God, whether it was good or bad. And that's illustrated in the story, which is also a parable, that he blessed her with a son, and then that son was killed. She could have turned on the guy and said, she could have cursed him and said, how dare you, give me a son and kill him. She could have gone totally away. But she continued to trust him, even in difficult times. She trusted him when he was a blessing, and she trusted him during difficult times. And the end result of that was a resurrected life. And I hope that in this message, that what we get from this is that overcoming death, it's not as easy as it seems. It's not so simple. It's very complex. And that we need to take a look at the messenger, and we need to realize that we're going to be chastised by the Torah, and that yes, there's blessings there, and there's also cursings, and yes, that we are full of sin, and others are as well, and that we want to move towards righteousness and should challenge ourselves and criticize ourselves, not just others. And because that's the only one you can guarantee can grow, because you know you can change your ideas. You don't know you can change other people. But also that we should be slow and careful in our judgment of others when we're bringing judgment to others, and hope for them that they turn to righteousness, and let that be the driving force behind what we're doing. And in the same way, we understand that we might have to suffer and we might have to pay a cost for the Word of God, and for the messengers of God, and sometimes being long-suffering is the cost we pay for those people, as we would hope that Mashiach would be long-suffering with us during our wickedness, and when we don't get it, and when we're doing what's wrong and think we're justified. All of these things are messages about the process and the carefulness and the humility that it takes to overcome death. So until next time, I'm going to say shalom.